absolute privilege to be here today to talk about the power of collaboration. I've missed the LGfL conferences. There's always a very different energy at these kinds of conferences. Hopefully some of you are Chartered College members already, but we do a lot of kind of research-focused events, and they're brilliant. But I do think there's something slightly different about the crowd, if that's the right word, that we have here today. There might have been a few people looking down during the introduction, but I can assure you there'd be a whole lot more people looking down during the introduction at some of the events that I speak at. I think what I'm going to say today will hopefully build a bit on what Vic has said, and indeed on lots of things that we're all thinking about. And, it is amazing to see people here in real life, in person, after 2 years of doing virtually everything online. This is only the third time I've left Cornwall since before the pandemic, and I used to be in London 4 days a week, so that's a bit of a shift. So, the power of collaboration, a tour of the research. I am going to throw a load of bits of research at you because that's what I do. I'm director of research. And at the end, I will just include a bit.ly link that will take you to all of the things that I talk about, all the sources that I talk about, if you want to have a bit of a read of those. But first up, I guess the question which Vic set up so nicely is why collaboration? As someone working in a school, whether you're a teacher, a school leader, working in IT, support staff, it can feel a lot like this. There's 1,000,001 pressures on you. I think this is also quite a good photo for when you've bitten off more than you can chew, which is something I probably do quite often too. But it feels a lot like this a lot of the time in schools. And so we do have to choose how we spend our time. We have to make decisions about what are our priorities. And I suppose I would say that, for me, there is nothing more important in our schools than supporting and developing our staff if we want outcomes for our pupils to be the best that they can be. There's a whole load of research that demonstrates this. If we want to know, how can we predict how well pupils are going to do, there's a whole bunch of things that affect that, including their prior learning, including their home learning environment. But we don't necessarily have a massive amount of control over those. We can work on things like parental engagement. Actually, the evidence suggests that COVID has been quite good for that, for building kind of parental community engagement in learning. But we haven't got full control over that. But the thing that we do have at least some large level of control over in terms of making a difference for our children's outcome is the quality of teaching that they receive. And we can do that by supporting our teachers. I find the statistics around the impact of quality of teaching on pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds genuinely quite astounding. I sort of have to read it 3 or 4 times and think, really? Basically, if you're talking about children from a disadvantaged background in particular, if you imagine that in an average year of teaching, with an averagely effective teacher, a pupil does 1 year's worth of learning across a year, makes sense, right? If they've got a less effective teacher, they might only make half a year's worth of progress, half a year's worth of learning across that year. If they've got a really effective teacher, they would make 1.5 years worth of progress in that 1 year. So there's actually a whole year's worth of learning difference between the less effective teachers and the more effective teachers. And that's huge. Extrapolate that out across a whole school career, and that is a spectacularly big difference. And that's why I think there is literally nothing more important we can do than support and develop our teachers. And no matter what your role in school is, there are ways that you can contribute to that. So it's easy to say, all right, the most effective teachers will have a great impact. Less effective teachers, maybe less they're not going to have as good an impact. Well, what do we do about that? We know there's a teacher shortage. We can't just kind of say, oh, well, if we don't think they're very good, we'll get rid of them. Actually, we also aren't very good at being able to tell who great teachers are. There are very, very few easy ways to say, here's the best teachers. But what we do know is that actually how good teachers are is not so much to do with the teachers as individuals. It's not to do with them personally. It's not that some people are magically born to be great teachers and some are not. What we actually see is that it has a lot to do with the environment that they work in and the support and development that they get. So on screen now is a graph which shows how teachers get better over time. From the start of their career into 10 years plus of experience, looking at their impact on children's outcome in maths. This is research from the US because they collect data against individual teachers and pupil progress in a way that we just don't here. So a lot of the stuff I talk about will be from there. And it's probably not overly surprising that in the first 2 or 3 years of a teacher's career, they get better really quickly. Those of you who are teachers will know from that moment you set foot in the classroom and think, I have no idea what I'm doing here. You do get better quite rapidly. It's a steep learning curve, quite terrifying at the time. I can still remember setting foot in the classroom for the first time. I was an English teacher, year 9, teaching stone cold, if any of you taught that, thinking, I just have no idea what I'm doing. And you do get better quite quickly. But it's kind of what happens after that first 2 or 3 years that's really interesting, because this is what happens to teachers on average. But if we look at what happens to teachers who are in a strong professional environment, and I'll talk about what that means in a moment, we see that they continue getting better over time. And if we look at teachers in a relatively weak professional environment, there's a real sense that after year 3, they sort of slightly start to stagnate. They're not necessarily getting any more effective after 3 years in the classroom. And that's quite terrifying, actually. In most careers, you do tend to kind of keep progressing. So there's something really important here about if we want our teachers to be highly effective and we want the best outcome for the children and young people we work with, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, if we want to narrow the attainment gap, it's that we need to look at. How do we build a strong professional environment for our teachers? So, what is this mysterious strong professional environment? What these researchers sort of defined it as is up on screen. Consistently enforced rules around behaviour. They weren't looking at the particular approach the school takes to behaviour. They weren't saying it's got to be zero tolerance, it's got to be restorative justice. They were just saying it's about it being consistent, everybody, pupils and staff, understanding it and following and applying those processes so that teachers' time is not spent on managing behaviour, it is spent on teaching and learning. It's about teachers having time and resources for professional development. It's about a culture of trust and respect and openness across the school. About the commitment to student achievement being at the heart of everything that the school does, which I think came across so nicely from what Vic was talking about. Crucially, and the focus of today, opportunities for peer collaboration between staff across the school, and finally, any teacher evaluation being focused on improving quality of teaching rather than anything else. But it's that collaboration point I want to pick up on today, because as we come together for the first time in a long time, that feels really powerful. And as I said, I want to think about that in terms of face-to-face and in terms of with technology. And what we see when we kind of have a powerful professional environment is that our teachers end up in this kind of happy cycle where they're satisfied, where they stay in their school, where they, obviously the other means to doing that apparently is creating dating services. And I'm assuming Vic's already got a pathway for the children of these couples to go into teacher training and for into teaching at the school. But they're retained in the school they're in, and they're also retained in the profession. They become more effective over time. They become more confident in their practice, which increases their job satisfaction. We know one of the reasons people go into teaching is because they think they'll be good at it. So of course, if you feel you are doing a good job, you become more satisfied, you're more likely to stay, and this cycle continues. So these are the kinds of things that contribute to teacher job satisfaction. And again, right up there is opportunities for cooperation. We see this consistently across the research. So teacher collaboration and effectiveness, what do we know from the research about teacher collaboration specifically? Well, first of all, there was a study done in the US that looked at, basically it asked teachers in a school to say how often they collaborated with colleagues and how useful they found it. And they kind of combined those things together to come up with a quality of collaboration rating. And they found consistently that schools where the teachers said they had higher quality collaboration, so they collaborated more and they found it more useful, were the more high performing schools consistently. And within those schools, consistently, the individual teachers who said they collaborated more and said that they found that more useful were the ones who were more effective in terms of pupil outcome. There is such clear research to show that quality collaboration contributes to pupils achieving more highly in a school in various ways. There's a couple of other really specific bits of research that I love. One about again, I mentioned that it can be quite hard to know who the best teachers are, but again, in the US, they have kind of quite strict measures for these things. And there's a really interesting piece of research where two academics thought, not completely unreasonably, that in a school, probably you know who your best teachers are. And as a teacher, if you were kind of thinking, I don't know what to do about X, Y, or Z, you will go to those best teachers and ask them for advice. And so they did a bit of a study to look at this. And they were like, turns out that's not the case at all. It turns out that actually the best teachers, sort of objectively best teachers, are not approached for advice more often. There's no real correlation there. But what they did find was that the best teachers were the ones who went and sought advice from other people the most. They were the ones who were out there asking other people, it doesn't really matter who they were asking, how are you doing this? What are you doing with this? That willingness to learn and build and develop from others seemed to be crucially linked to kind of their own progression. And also we see that even when there's not formal collaboration going on, If a teacher works in a highly effective department or in a highly effective year group team in primary, they get better themselves. And even if they then move to a less effective department, they continue being a more effective teacher over time. So how do we make this work? I was an English teacher, as I said. Collaboration can be a whole bunch of different things. Even if you look at the definitions of collaboration, you'll see a whole bunch of different definitions. And actually, I'm not that strict or purist about it. I think collaboration can be a whole bunch of things, from very formal to informal. There's a few examples on screen of some of the kind of more formal structured collaboration we might see in school, mentoring, coaching, but also things like just time to talk in the staff room, which is something we lost during COVID, right? We heard that consistently, that teachers found it a bit isolating talking on screen. It's not the same as the kind of conversations you have face to face. Lots of different ways we can promote collaboration. But of course, they're not all necessarily equally productive. It seems to be certain topics of collaboration seem to be especially good if you're interested particularly in student outcomes. So discussions around kind of assessment, around how pupils are doing, around their progress, seem to be a great way of kind of sharing our knowledge of individual pupils in our school to make the best decisions. And there are certain sort of preconditions for effective collaboration as well. So that includes the teachers themselves being bought in, personal characteristics. If the teachers don't think it's a good idea, if they think, why are you making me do this, they're not going to get anything out of it. Structural characteristics are things like actually having time and space to do this, and that can be one of the hardest things if we feel like that dog in the middle of the sheep, right? How do we make time for this? How do we make it valued? And also group characteristics. How many people have you got together at once? What's the mix of skills? What's the level of trust in that group? And when you have those things in place, that's when you start to see really productive collaboration. And also actually leadership as well, the kind of sense to which the sort of leadership are engaged in teaching and learning and leading that and collaborating is really important. A really interesting one, just in terms of, I thought anyway, in terms of kind of COVID, is that like school layout makes a big difference with who you collaborate with. That probably sounds really obvious, but you have lots of natural interactions with people who have classrooms really close to you. And this is important if you're thinking about maybe early career teachers in your school. We know what a difference collaboration makes for them, especially. Who are you going to put them next to in terms of a classroom? Who do you want them bumping into and learning from and hearing from? Make decisions based around that. But again, it's kind of tricky when we're thinking about this new COVID digital world, right? You don't have those informal interactions. So creating opportunities for those is so vital again now. Why do we think it works? Why do we think collaboration is so important? Well, I think there's a few things. First of all, it opens you up to challenge and alternative perspectives. I think that's where this piece around teachers, the most effective teachers learning from others comes from. That if you are open to going and seeing, oh, maybe the way I do it is not the only way of doing it, that's pretty powerful. It's about sharing knowledge and expertise, of course, knowledge of teaching and learning practice, but also knowledge of the pupils, discussing actually this pupil who's maybe finding this quite hard. Is there another subject where they're not finding it so hard, where there's something that's being done differently? What can I learn from that? It helps you to reflect on your own practice as well. Of course, it's the same as when you have someone come and observe you teaching. Part of the power is kind of both of you are kind of thinking, oh, I do that differently. Or why did I do it like that? That's really powerful. It can also help with kind of committing to making change. There's some evidence that things like sort of CPD programs where you commit to your colleagues, oh, I'm going to try this new thing, you're much more likely to go and actually try that new thing than if you just think, oh yeah, that's a great idea, must do that sometimes, realise 4 years later you've never tried that. And a sense, really importantly, this is where I kind of want to wrap up, of being part of a whole. This whole sort of happy cycle doesn't exist just for teachers in isolation. It exists as part of a whole kind of collective within your school, but within the whole system of kind of being effective, but also knowing that we're doing a great job. And sometimes with the pressure we hear from the media, it can feel a bit like we're being told all the time teachers are not doing enough, because obviously we were all just sitting around doing nothing during the pandemic, right, while schools were closed. That's sort of the impression you sometimes get from the newspapers, and we just know how inaccurate that is. But it doesn't help us as a profession to think, yes, we're recognised, we're valued. We have to do that collectively. We have to say we're doing an amazing job. And there's, again, huge research to demonstrate that schools where teachers have confidence in themselves and their colleagues and their ability to make a difference for children and young people, which is this notion of collective teacher efficacy, are the most effective schools. They are the ones that make the biggest difference. And of course, you could say maybe those schools just know they're doing a good job and that's why they're confident. But it seems to work both ways. Schools that have confidence and say, do you know what, we're not going to worry excessively about Ofsted. We're not going to worry about performance measures. We're worrying about what's right for our children and young people. Those are the schools that make the best decisions and in turn actually get the best Ofsted outcomes and everything else, because they're prioritising the right thing, the children. And again, lots of evidence to show that this is what I was just saying, that actually those schools do have the greatest effect. So where does tech come in? There's lots of different ways that actually, although it can kind of be challenging not having the kind of face-to-face interactions we used to, what we have seen over COVID, of course, is huge opportunities, a massive increase in online CPD. And what that has done is opened up huge opportunities for teachers in areas that maybe sometimes didn't have access to the same quality of CPD. I live in Cornwall. I was chair of governors for a school down there. They absolutely didn't have access to the sorts of conferences that I'm guessing lots of you are kind of London area have access to all the time. There are schools with just one subject teacher for many, many subjects. Who are they going to be collaborating around their subject with? Actually, technology really increases the opportunities for that. Again, in rural areas where schools are, even they might only be 5 miles apart, that's still probably a half-hour journey. That's not a sort of practical pop there during your lesson. Video conferencing, again, a great way to learn from each other, to be able to discuss and share. So there's a ton of things we can do with technology to enhance opportunities for collaboration. And that's where we end up with this lovely happy cycle. I did say if you, it's actually a tiny CC, not a, hopefully that is actually still up to date, that link, I should check that. But I'll make sure it is. If not, if you're interested in seeing the kind of research that I've referred to there, it's all in something on the Chartered College website. You can search for it on the Chartered College's My College website too. Absolute pleasure to have a chance to talk to you, and I just want to leave you with this last quote really, which is from that study I mentioned. Results demonstrate that higher performing teachers are not more likely to be sought out for advice. Instead, higher performing teachers are more likely to seek advice. And that applies to all of you, whatever your role is. Go and learn from others like you are today. Thank you.